Coach Danny here. About 10 days ago, my partner and I made a short video where we discussed the events in Palestine. And since then, there was a ceasefire for 6 days, thank God. But a few days ago, that ceasefire ended. And I spent most of the day watching the news, watching Israel go right back to indiscriminately bombing anything that breathes. And quite frankly, I find myself overwhelmed with emotion, with confusion. What can we do to help these people? What can we do to stop the bombs being dropped as I'm making this video? So I figured the most logical thing to do is just turn on the camera and just keep talking about this issue. Bring more awareness to this issue for the 20 or 30 people that might actually watch this video. But before I do, I want to preface two very important points. Point number one, I live in the United States. And because I live in this country, I've given the right to speak freely. And with that right, for example, if I see politicians or leaders doing something that I don't approve of, I'm allowed to speak on it and criticize them. Or if I see world events, such as the government of Israel bombing indiscriminately a bunch of women and children, I'm allowed to speak on it and I'm allowed to criticize it. And in doing so, this does not make me anti-Semitic or anti-Jewish. Because remember, at the end of the day, I'm a Muslim. And as a Muslim, I am commanded, whether you know this or not, to respect other people's viewpoints, religions, and culture. Especially those who we call the people of the book, the Jews and the Christians. But the political movement known as Zionism and the current Israeli government, nah, bro. I can criticize them all day. Because just open your eyes and see what they're doing. Of course I can criticize this. But to allude that this criticism makes me somehow anti-Jewish or anti-Semitic, this is illogical. For example, the world collectively got together and called the group today called ISIS a bunch of psychopaths, and we all criticize them, including Muslims. Does that mean those who criticize ISIS are somehow Islamophobic? Of course not. That's illogical too. And it's just to clarify, it's not me who's criticizing the Israeli government. I'm not a lawyer or a political scientist. Therefore, I have to rely on those experts to tell me if the Israeli government is doing something right or wrong. And every expert I listen to is saying clearly the Israeli government is breaking every single international law. The same laws that I remind you again, that the United States co-wrote and we are the champions of. And now we are allowing Israel to break all of them. Preface number two. Now the opposite's also true. Just because I'm defending the Palestinians' right to exist, just because I'm defending the lives of the innocent Palestinians dying from this illogical bombing campaign, does not mean suddenly I'm pro-Hamas. I'm sorry, Fox News, that's not the way it works. Again, I'm a Muslim, which means I'm against the killing of all innocent life, regardless of who it is. Okay, with that being said, I want to talk about the last video Anthony and I made. When we released it, I was very fascinated by the response I got from my students. I had about a dozen of my students come up to me personally and want to talk further about it, mostly of them non-Muslim. And I observed two very interesting things. First, they all expressed compassion for the Palestinians. Thank God we haven't lost our humanity. But more importantly, they all also said something similar. They all said, quote, "I didn't know," end quote. This statement, "I didn't know," it bothered me. I analyzed this for days. I kept thinking to myself, how don't they know? How is it possible they didn't know that for decades, the people of Palestine, of West Bank and Gaza, have been severely oppressed by the Israeli government? How didn't they know for decades now in this part of the world, there's almost a weekly killing of a Palestinian, a weekly stealing of another piece of land, or a weekly demolition of yet another home? And then it hit me. I get it. The reason you're not seeing this is because you're not watching the news like I'm watching the news. You see, the way I watch the news is I get home on my TV, I put on CNN, Fox News, I switch between the two. Then on my phone, I put on Al Jazeera. On my tablet, I put on BBC. And then in front of me, I have my laptop. I pull up independent news sources like Jeremy Skeha on Twitter or Democracy Now! And yes, it sounds crazy. Believe me, I hear from my wife every time I do it. Now, if you watch the news this way, that's assuming you even watch the news, because I bet you young guys, young kids, you don't even watch the news. You probably get your news from Facebook or something weird like that. But if you do watch the news the way I'm describing it, you get to see a very clear pattern. And that pattern is the Western media is trying to go out of their way to push a certain narrative. They avoid tough questions. They conceal stories, or some people might call that whitewashing. And worse, they present stories as facts even before they fact check them. In other words, what I'm trying to say is American journalism used to be something you'd be proud of. When I was young, it was something that really the culture was very proud of. I don't believe I'm saying this, but I think Donald Trump is right. There is something wrong with mainstream media. And this concerns me as an American, especially right now when we're watching a conflict where the estimates say every 10 minutes, as I'm making this video, another child dies. Now you might say I'm only saying this because they're not telling me what I want to hear. CNN's not giving me what I want to hear. That's illogical. Because I'm a college-educated human being that has the ability to analyze unbiasedly. And quite frankly, the news is not supposed to be like YouTube or Facebook where it feeds me algorithms that I want to hear. Journalism should be always about getting to the truth, exposing the truth. That way the public, the society is well informed. For example, if it's true that the Israeli government is actually breaking international law, then why aren't the journalists asking those tough questions? Because when I watch the other sources, they are. For example, they're using white phosphorus. They're bombing hospitals. They're bombing schools. They're bombing UN facilities. Over 15,000 civilians and counting are dying. 7,000 of those are children and counting. Not to mention how many people under the rubble they still haven't dug up because they don't have fuel for the trucks to dig them up. These are all very valid questions that the media should be asking. The media should be presenting and showing, but they're not. It's very concealed, as I say. But the other sources are asking these questions, are showing those images. For example, another question. Why is the Israeli army now going to West Bank, arresting hundreds of people, killing already hundreds of people? What business they have going to the West Bank? I thought the war's in Gaza. Or how about the most simple, obvious question? Why aren't they asking? You, the Israeli army, told everybody to go to the south. And then you went and leveled the north, there's nothing left. And then you now turn around bombing the south, the same spot you told them to go to. Just ask that question. And I could go on, but I think you see my point on this issue. Another point I want to raise, similar to what we said in our last video, is that this war did not start October 7th. You don't believe me? Go do it yourself. Go to Wikipedia and just type in military operations of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And go see the long list of military operations that the Israeli army has done in West Bank and Gaza. And you tell me if this started October 7th. Or an even easier way to understand this is simply look at a map of this area. Now, if you go to CNN, the map you're going to see looks like this. A completely uniform shape. But actually, the map looks like this. This map tells the real story. What's that story? The Israeli government for years, for decades, has been slowly chopping up and stealing Palestinians' lands. And in the process has killed thousands of innocent Palestinians and leaving what remains a bunch of little mini islands. And little Gaza to the left is just completely locked up. Over 2 million people were locked in that little piece of land. And that's why the news refers to it as an open air prison. And as if it couldn't get worse, everything that goes in and out of these little islands in this open air prison is fully controlled by the Israeli army. The amount of water allowed in, restricted. The amount of food allowed in, restricted. Electricity, restricted. Internet, restricted. Goods entering, restricted. They don't even allow them to collect rainwater to supplement these restrictions. Only Israeli citizens are allowed to do that. And by the way, everything I just mentioned is before October 7th. Now, nothing is allowed in. Which does beg the question though, which is a worse way to die for these children? Death by a US-made smart bomb that's gifted to the Israeli army, then dropped on your building? Or death by starvation? Unfortunately, if this all access, unlimited, unrestricted bombing campaign that Israel's being allowed to do, yes, I said allowed, I didn't stutter, then I suppose in 5 or 10 days we will know the answer, won't we? That's all for now. Salam.